The stale breath of the small airport customs, late flight, clung to the air like a shroud, a peculiar blend of disinfectant, forgotten coffee, and the faint metallic tang of jet fuel. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, casting a pallid glow on the worn linoleum and the faces of tired travelers. I leaned against a counter, a sheaf of import documents clutched loosely in my hand, the weight of them less significant than the invisible anchors dragging at my spirit. My gaze drifted over the uniformed customs officer, his movements practiced, monotonous, a stark contrast to the chaotic rhythm that once defined my days. This new existence, a quiet negotiation of tariffs and cargo manifests, felt like a self-imposed penance, a barren landscape after a wildfire. The world outside this sterile bubble, I told myself, was no longer my concern. Its shadows and its screams belonged to others now. Yet, the hum of the cooling units in the wall, a low, persistent thrum, seemed to whisper of things unseen, of patterns forming in the periphery. I traced the edge of a chipped laminate counter with a thumb, the rough texture a small comfort against the creeping numbness. My reflection in the glass partition opposite me showed a man etched by more than just time. There was a weariness around the eyes, a stubborn set to the jaw that no amount of quiet living could erase. My phone, a relic of a different era, vibrated in my pocket, a sharp, insistent tremor that cut through the airport's dull murmur. I pulled it out, my fingers slow, almost unwilling. The caller ID glowed, a name from a life I'd tried to bury. The chief, he wouldn't call unless. I hesitated, the ghost of 1,000 past emergencies flickering behind my eyes. The vibration intensified, a frantic drumbeat beneath my ribs. I pressed the screen. Cole, the chief's voice was gravelly, strained, a raw edge I hadn't heard in years. They hit the vault at the downtown financial district, not a single alarm, clean as bone. My grip tightened on the phone, the import documents forgotten. The casual precision in his tone, the way he stressed clean as bone, sent an icy tendril unspooling through my veins. What did they take? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, a mask of disinterest already falling into place. The Barrows collection, the sapphires, and a few other pieces, high value. But that's not it, Cole, it's Raven placed on the empty pedestal where the star of Orion's sapphire once rested, and the entry point, a ventilation shaft precisely 3 floors above the vault. The same intricate series of cuts on the grates, the same bypass on the pressure plates. The air in the customs hall seemed to thicken, pressing in on me. A raven's feather, a ventilation shaft meticulously breached, the specific sequence of cuts. My mind, long dormant, sprang to life, a flurry of images and data, each one a shard of a past nightmare. He hadn't used feathers, not exactly. But the precision, the symbolism of leaving something behind, the method of entry into seemingly impenetrable spaces. It was too close, too damned close. A copycat, I stated, the words tasting like ash. It had to be. He was gone, years ago. The case that had shattered my career, my reputation, my very sense of self. The one I'd failed to close, leaving a gaping wound in the city's psyche. That's what we thought, the chief conceded, his voice losing its initial conviction, replaced by a note of desperate uncertainty. But the security footage, it's a phantom. No face, no discernible build, and the cuts on the grate. They're identical to the ones we found at the old Rothschild estate. Remember, before he started leaving the other things. My breath hitched. The Rothschild estate. The very first break-in, a prelude to the horrors that followed. This new heist, then, was a return to the beginning of his methodology, or a meticulous recreation by someone intimately familiar with every detail of the original case files. The pressure plates, I murmured, my gaze fixed on the sterile white wall, seeing not the wall, the intricate schematics of an old security system. The bypass required a specific frequency modulation, almost like a tuning fork, something only a handful of people would ever know about, let alone be able to replicate. Exactly, the chief confirmed, his relief tinged with a fresh wave of panic. Our technicians are baffled. It's beyond anything they've seen, and Cole. The lock on the main vault, it wasn't picked. It was coaxed. No forced entry, no telltale scratches, just open. My knuckles were white against the phone, coaxed. This wasn't just a copycat. This was something far more insidious, a deliberate echo designed to taunt, to provoke, or it was him. He vanished without a trace, a ghost in the urban sprawl. What do you need, Chief? I asked, the question escaping before I could fully process it. The words felt foreign, yet terrifyingly familiar on my tongue. The chief didn't waste time with pleasantries. He knew my weakness, my lingering obsession with the case that had broken me. We need you to look at it. Just look. My team, they're good, but this feels like him. And you were the only one who ever truly understood the way his mind worked, the way he moved. I closed my eyes, a silent battle raging within me. The memory of the victims, the faces of their families, the shame of my failure all surged forward, a tidal wave threatening to drown me again. I had promised myself I was done. It was a siren song I was powerless to resist. Every angle, every minute detail, and tell my forensics team to look for microscopic traces of anything unusual, anything that doesn't belong. I paused, my gaze sweeping over the mundane customs hall one last time, a farewell to the quiet life I had so desperately tried to build. This isn't just a heist, Chief, it's a message, and I think I know who it's for. The Chief's sigh of relief was audible even through the phone's static. Thank I, Cole, I knew I could count on I. He hung up, leaving me in the humming quiet of the customs hall, the phone still warm in my hand. My carefully constructed wall of indifference had crumbled, revealing the raw, exposed nerve of my past. A small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through my hand. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered, as I turned away from the bland reality of my present, already pulled by the magnetic force of a ghost I thought I had laid to rest. The game, it seemed, had begun anew. And I, Cole, the disgraced, the haunted, was once again a reluctant player. The humming quiet of the small airport customs, late flight, stretched taut around me, a thin membrane between my past and an unwanted future. The phone, an unbidden weight in my hand, still held the residual warmth of the voice on the other end. That tremor, a faint echo of old fear, had not fully receded. Redemption, the voice had hinted, or a deeper plunge into the abyss I'd so painstakingly climbed out of. My wall, so meticulously built brick by brick with indifference and solitude, lay in rubble. I looked out at the rain-streaked tarmac, the distant glow of city lights blurring into a watery smear. The world outside beckoned, a siren song of familiar danger. My fingers, unbidden, moved to the worn leather of my wallet, extracting the tarnished badge I still carried, a relic of a life I'd buried. The precinct chief's words, sharp and precise, had sliced through the years. It's the same, Cole, too many similarities, the signature. It's him. Him, the phantom that had haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams, the one I'd failed to catch. A sigh heavy with the weight of old failures escaped my lips. I couldn't walk away, not again. The thought settled in my gut, a cold, hard stone. My disgrace might have stripped me of authority, but it hadn't dulled the edge of my resolve. This wasn't about a badge anymore. It was about a debt unpaid, a ghost still roaming. The chief's tone had suggested the latest incident was fresh, still raw. Rain lashed against the glass, mirroring the turmoil in my mind. I gripped the door handle, gripped tight. The determination in my gut was hardening, forging a new resolve. This time, I wouldn't be standing on the sidelines. We pulled up to the perimeter of what had once been a bustling jewelry warehouse, now a skeletal hulk against the bruised sky. Yellow tape. A garish ribbon of warning fluttered in the wind, marking the scene of the latest violation. Uniformed officers milled about, their flashlights carving arcs in the gloom. I paid the driver, the worn bills feeling like a heavy price for the pilgrimage I was making. My trench coat, an old friend, felt like armor as I approached the scene. A junior officer, young and eager, intercepted me. "Can I help? Aye, sir. This area is restricted." "Just passing through," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Curiosity, heard something on the radio. I gestured vaguely towards the warehouse, then let my gaze drift over his shoulder, a trick I'd mastered long ago to appear disengaged while taking everything in. The officer, perhaps sensing my disinterest or perhaps just eager to return to his post, merely nodded. "Nothing to see here, sir. Just a standard break-in." "Standard," I murmured, catching a glimpse of a particular scorch mark on the metal frame of a loading bay door. It wasn't the clean, precise cut of a thermal lance. It was jagged, brutal, a stylistic choice. My gut twisted. Ozone, not from lightning but from something else, something electrical used with destructive intent. I found an old, rusted fence panel, half torn from its moorings, offering a narrow ingress. My movements were fluid, muscle memory taking over. Inside the perimeter, the wind howled through broken windows, an eerie lament. The main vault door, a formidable slab of steel, lay crumpled inward, a testament to brute force. Not an elegant breach, but an aggressive, almost theatrical display of power. My gaze fixed on the edges of the mangled metal, seeking the familiar pattern, and there it was. Not a clean cut, but a series of overlapping, almost decorative gouges, a signature. This wasn't a professional crew looking for a quick score. This was a statement. I moved deeper, the crunch of shattered glass under my boots echoing in the cavernous space. The interior was a wasteland of overturned display cases, scattered jewels, and torn security wiring. My eyes, honed by years of sifting through chaos, picked out a detail near a collapsed shelf, a length of thin, reinforced rope, discarded. It was tied with a specific knot, a complex fisherman's bend with an extra loop, a flourish unnecessary for mere securing. Wait, that didn't add up. The chief had said the signature was there, hinting at the brutality, the theatrical destruction. But this knot. This was too perfect. It was the exact knot the old killer had used to bind his victims, a macabre calling card. My breath hitched. Could it be a copycat, one so obsessed they'd replicated even the most obscure details? Or was this truly him back from the dead? A wave of nausea washed over me. I knelt, my fingers brushing the rope, the fibers rough against my skin. The knot was identical. The precision, the unnecessary intricacy, it was a taunt. My mind raced, connecting disparate threads, the chief's words, the jagged scorch marks, the peculiar knot. It felt like walking into a meticulously constructed trap, each detail placed with deliberate malice, but for whom? There was I seeing what I wanted to see. My failure still stung, a raw wound beneath the scar tissue. There was I so desperate for a second chance, for vindication, that I was fabricating evidence in my own mind. I closed my eyes, picturing the old case files, the crime scene photos burned into my memory. The distinctive pattern of damage, the intricate knot. No, this wasn't projection. This was a direct echo, clear as a bell, too clear. My hands clenched, the rough texture of the rope biting into my palm. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't a copycat. The meticulous planning, the deliberate cruelty masked by a facade of robbery, it all screamed of the same mind. The ghost I'd failed to catch was real, solid, and back, and he was mocking me. This wasn't just about solving a case, it was about laying a ghost to rest. My ghost. My personal stake had just been hammered into place with the precision of a master craftsman. The rain outside intensified, a symphony of the coming storm. I was ready. The memory of that jagged scorch mark clung to me like damp river fog, refusing to dissipate. It wasn't just a burn. It was a signature, crude yet deliberate, etched into the metal skin of the warehouse door. For 2 days, its image had haunted the periphery of my vision, blurring the edges of sleep, sharpening the taste of stale coffee. I had walked the perimeter of that abandoned factory floor a dozen times since, a ghost among the echoes of forgotten industry, searching for a phantom breath, a whisper of the familiar chill that had once defined my world. My apartment, a dim canvas of half-light and forgotten dust, offered no solace. The corkboard in the corner, a relic from a different life, now bore the weight of newspaper clippings, grainy security stills, and the faint, almost invisible lines of red string connecting dots only I could see. The first 2 incidents, the jewelry distribution hub, then the pharmaceutical depot, had been clean, surgical extractions. Valuable, yes, but almost prosaic in their precision, except for that scorch mark, a discordant note in an otherwise perfectly orchestrated symphony of theft. I remembered the old case, the one that had fractured my career and splintered my peace. Not the thefts, but the manner of them. The way the perpetrator had always left behind a single, seemingly trivial object, a small, polished stone, tucked into the palm of each victim. A macabre calling card, easily overlooked by the untrained eye, a whisper of a pattern that had screamed at me alone. The current heists so far lacked that personal touch, but the scorch mark, it felt like a prelude, a test run for something far more sinister. My phone, a cheap burner I kept for. Reasons buzzed on the scarred wooden table. A number I didn't recognize, blew the main vault. My breath hitched. The airport. That was an escalation. A leap from warehouses to federal ground. Casualties? None reported yet, but it's a mess. The lead detective is already there, probably tearing the place apart. The drive was a blur of streetlights and rain-slicked asphalt. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine a dull counterpoint to the frantic drumming beneath my ribs. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a message. I arrived at the small airport customs, late flight area under a sky bruised purple and gray. Flashing blue and red lights painted the tarmac, reflecting off the slick wings of a grounded cargo plane. Uniformed officers moved with a grim efficiency, their faces tight with the weight of the night's violation. The air tasted of ozone and something metallic, a ghost of the force that had ripped through the security. The customs building, a squat concrete structure, bore the scars of the assault. A gaping maw where the reinforced door had once stood, twisted rebar jutting out like broken teeth. This wasn't a clean cut. This was raw, explosive power. Inside, the scene was a tableau of methodical destruction. Debris littered the floor, shattered glass, bent metal, scattered papers. The main vault, a behemoth of steel and reinforced concrete, was no more. But it wasn't the jaggedness that caught my eye, not entirely. It was the shape of the destruction. The pattern. The last time I had seen such a specific, almost artistic level of explosive force, it had been at the scene of a triple homicide, the one that had ended my career. The killer had used a precise, almost ceremonial method of breaching, not just to enter but to sculpt the entry, and here it was again on a grander, more audacious scale. The jagged edges weren't random, they formed a crude, almost abstract symbol. My gaze drifted to a small, overturned table near the vault's former location. A customs officer's personal effects lay scattered. Among them, partially hidden beneath a crumpled manifest, was a small, smooth river stone. Not a common rock, but one with a peculiar, almost luminous gray hue, perfectly ovular, as if polished by centuries of water. My breath hitched. My vision narrowed. The world outside, the flashing lights, the murmur of voices, receded. It was the stone, the same type I had found clutched in the hands of the victims all those years ago. The one I had been mocked for fixating on, dismissed as a coincidence. Cole! The voice was like a hammer blow. I turned slowly. The lead detective, a man whose weary eyes held a permanent resentment towards me, stood a few feet away, his jaw tight. His gaze swept from the devastated vault to me, then back again, lingering on the small stone I hadn't yet touched. "What are you doing here?" inquired, his tone devoid of welcome, heavy with accusation. "Playing ghost again?" "Just observing," I managed, my voice rough. My mind raced, piecing together fragments, the scorch mark, the specific breach. Now this stone, not anymore. This isn't some dusty warehouse. This is federal property, and whatever was in that vault, it was highly sensitive, not just cash. He gestured vaguely at the destruction. They didn't just take it, they made a statement. This wasn't just a series of heists. This was personal. A calculated taunt designed for me and me alone. The killer I had failed to catch hadn't disappeared. They had simply been waiting, watching, learning. The detective's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable behind the professional disdain. "You think? Last time you thought, Cole, a lot of people got hurt, and you ended up on the outside looking in. Stay out of this. You're a liability." His words, meant to sting, only fueled the fire that had begun to rage within me. A liability, perhaps. They wanted me to doubt myself, to retreat. It was a cruel invitation, and I had no choice but to accept. The game had begun anew, and this time I wouldn't let him slip away. The hum of the terminal at the small airport customs, late flight, was a low, persistent thrum beneath the thin veneer of quiet. Fluorescent tubes, yellowed with age, cast anemic light across the polished floor, reflecting the spectral silhouettes of distant aircraft. I was a lone sentinel amidst the ghosts of departures and arrivals, the stale air thick with the memory of recycled breath and forgotten journeys. A weary customs officer, his face a roadmap of late nights, watched me from behind a reinforced counter, his presence a dull pressure at my back. My fingers, stiff from hours spent navigating digital archives, danced across the cold keyboard of a borrowed terminal. Each click echoed the relentless tick of a clock I couldn't outrun. The screen glowed, a window into the labyrinthine trails of cargo manifests, flight logs, and declaration forms. I chased shadows, cross-referencing names, dates, and destinations of the recent heist victims. The first, a collector of ancient cartography. The second, a private curator of geological rarities. The third, a retired naval architect with an obsession for unique maritime instruments. On the surface, their stolen treasures seemed disparate, a parchment scroll, a crystalline geode, a brass sextant. My gaze was a hawk sweeping over column after column of alphanumeric code. Doubt, a familiar companion, gnawed at the edges of my focus. It was a language, yes, but one I hadn't yet fully deciphered. Then a flicker. A recurring entry subtle enough to be dismissed as coincidence, yet stubborn in its reappearance. Not in the items stolen, but in the provenance of certain recent shipments received by the victims. Each of them, within the last 6 months, had taken delivery of something originating from a remote, obscure port nestled on the edge of a forgotten continent. The port itself was tiny, almost a ghost town on the digital map, servicing a single, privately owned mining operation known only by a series of alphanumeric characters. Site 734 Alpha. My breath hitched. Site 734 Alpha. It wasn't the exact name I remembered, but the type of designation, the remote coordinates, the specific mineral listed in the cargo declarations from that site. A peculiar iridescent ore known for its unique properties in ancient metallurgy. I remembered it. I remembered the endless reports, the hushed conversations, the dismissed warnings. My eyes, fixed on the glowing text, felt as though they were burning. The victims of my old case, the serial killer I'd failed to catch, they weren't just random targets. They were all connected in some tangential financial way to the funding of exploratory archaeological digs or the suppression of data surrounding certain geological finds. And one of those specific, contentious digs, the one that had been quietly shuttered, its findings sealed, was located perilously close to the coordinates of Site 734 Alpha. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, began to clink into place with an unnerving precision. The ancient cartography, the crystalline geode, the brass sextant, they weren't just valuable. They were pieces of a puzzle, instruments of discovery, all connected to the very act of unearthing something, of locating something. And the stolen items, I realized with a sickening lurch, likely held a shared, deeper significance related to the unique mineral from Site 734 Alpha, or perhaps to whatever secrets that site itself held. The heists were not merely about acquiring wealth. They were about retrieving something, about reclaiming a narrative, or perhaps about completing a journey. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for a fraction of a second. The same mind, or one intricately connected, was at play. The killer I had failed to stop wasn't just mirroring old methods. They were continuing a story, picking up threads I had left frayed and broken. The customs officer cleared his throat, a soft, polite sound that nevertheless jolted me from my trance. "Anything else, sir?" he murmured, his voice laced with the fatigue of the hour. This was only the beginning. I had to understand what was unearthed and why it was being reburied piece by stolen piece. I was a lone sentinel amidst the sparse, weary travelers, my gaze fixed on the double doors that led from international arrivals. My source, a whisper in the static of the underworld, had placed him here fleeing, or so I hoped. My breath hitched when I saw him. Not the hulking shadow I'd imagined, but a man of unassuming stature, his shoulders hunched, a cheap duffel bag slung across his chest. He moved with a nervous twitch, his eyes darting, as if expecting the floor to open and swallow him whole. The ledger keeper, they called him, a man known for his meticulous records and his even more meticulous ability to vanish. He was a peripheral figure in the old case, a whisper of a name that slipped through my fingers like smoke, someone who facilitated the killer's intricate logistics without ever getting blood on his own hands. He cleared customs with a perfunctory nod from the uniformed officer, his passport barely glanced at. My heart hammered a rhythm against my ribs, not from fear, but from the raw, desperate hunger for answers that had gnawed at me for years. This was it, the thread I'd been chasing through the labyrinth of the past. I let him walk past the baggage claim, past the automated doors that hissed open to the biting night air. He picked up his pace, a man on borrowed time. He froze, his back to me, shoulders tensing. A deer caught in the glare. Slowly, he turned. His face, pale and drawn, was a map of fear and recognition. His eyes, small and beady, widened fractionally. "Cole," he breathed, the name a curse on his lips. "I didn't think. I thought I was gone." "Some ghosts linger longer than others," I replied, stepping closer, closing the distance between us. The fluorescent light caught the sheen of sweat on his brow. "Funny, isn't it, how the old tunes keep playing? The same rhythm, the same meticulous choreography, and I, still dancing to it." "I don't know what I read talking about," he stammered, his voice thin, almost reedy. He clutched the duffel bag tighter, his grip tight. "Don't I?" My gaze sharpened, piercing his flimsy denial. "The vault at the district bank, the jewelry exchange on Elm, the timing, the precision. It's a song only one conductor could write, and I the scorekeeper." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically towards the exit. "I'm just a small man, Cole. Always have been. I do what I'm told." "By whom?" I pressed, my voice low, dangerous. "The ghost from my past, or a new puppeteer pulling the same old strings?" He shook his head vehemently. "No, not him, not directly. He has others now, always does, always moving." "Who?" I demanded, taking another step, invading his personal space. His breath hitched again. "Who is orchestrating this new wave? The same methods, the same meticulous planning. Only patterns, and he doesn't like loose ends." I told them this was too close to the old ways, too dangerous. "Told who?" I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into the thin fabric of his jacket. "Tell me before I become another one of his loose ends." His fear curdled into a desperate energy. He tried to yank his arm free, struggling against my grip. "I don't understand, Cole. He's smarter now, more connected. He watches everything. He has eyes everywhere, even here." A sudden, sharp pain flared in my side. He had a knife, a small, ugly blade that gleamed under the sickly light. He hadn't pulled it out, but had driven it into my flesh with a desperate, frantic energy. A grunt escaped my lips, but I didn't release him. The duffel bag clattered to the floor, spilling a few innocuous items, a change of clothes, a worn paperback, a half-eaten energy bar, nothing incriminating. "Who is it?" I gasped, ignoring the blossoming wetness spreading across my shirt. "It's not a name I read looking for, Cole. It's the architect. He's building something new, something grander, he calls it." This was an evolution, a direct continuation. He thrashed, a desperate, cornered animal. My grip, though firm, was weakening, the blood loss stealing my strength. He slammed his head back, catching me square on the jaw. My vision blurred for a split second, the fluorescent lights strobing. The world spun, and for a terrifying moment I doubted my own resolve. Had I finally pushed too far, allowed my obsession to cloud my judgment to make me reckless? That moment of self-doubt was all he needed. He broke free, scrambling away, his eyes wide with a renewed, frantic energy. He didn't stop to retrieve his bag, didn't look back. I stumbled back against the wall, my hand pressing hard against the wound. The pain was a dull roar now, eclipsing all else. He was gone. The only lead vanished into the night. The architect. He hadn't given me a name, but he had given me a terrifying concept. A grander design. I was left alone in the anemic light, a fresh wound blooming on my side, and a profound, unsettling certainty that the game had just begun, and I was already several moves behind. The words, a cruel whisper against the din of the previous confrontation, still echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind. Symphony of silence. They clung to me, a phantom chill, as I navigated the muted expanse of small airport customs, late flight. The fluorescent light, usually harsh, felt softened by the hour, casting a pallid glow over the deserted check-in counters and the slow churn of the baggage carousel. The air, thick with the recycled breath of 1,000 strangers, carried the faint metallic scent of distant jet fuel, a promise of journeys I was not meant to take. My jacket, still bearing the faint imprint of a recent struggle, offered little comfort against the creeping cold that seemed to emanate from the polished linoleum floor. But his compositions had been loud, resonant, a cacophony of fear designed to shock. This new phrase, however, spoke of something far more insidious. Not the absence of sound, but the deliberate imposition of it. A silencing. The customs hall stirred with the arrival of the last inbound flight. A trickle of passengers, weary and disoriented, shuffled towards the customs officer, a woman whose face, etched with the fatigue of a long shift, held a quiet, stoic dignity. She moved with practiced efficiency, her questions crisp, her gaze unwavering as she examined passports and declarations. I watched, a predator in waiting, though for what I couldn't yet articulate. My gut, however, screamed urgency. My gaze drifted across the faces, the luggage, each traveler a fleeting story. Then, snagged, a younger man, perhaps in his late 20s, stood before the customs officer. Nothing outwardly remarkable about him, a generic travel backpack, sensible shoes. But his hands, as he carefully placed a small, intricately carved wooden box onto the counter, were unusually steady. Too steady. The box itself was exquisite, clearly custom-made, hinting at precious cargo within. He declared its contents, an antique clockwork mechanism. A jolt, sharp and sudden, coursed through me, a current of recognition. The customs officer, with a sigh, asked him to open it for inspection. He complied, his movements precise, almost reverent. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay a miniature universe of brass gears, delicate springs, and polished levers, all interlocking with breathtaking complexity. It was a masterpiece of mechanical artistry, a testament to intricate design. And then the memory surfaced, unbidden yet undeniably potent, a ghost from a forgotten corner of my mind, the architect of echoes. His final victim, found in that derelict warehouse, the scene meticulously staged. And near the victim's left hand, tucked beneath a loose floorboard, we had found it, a single tiny gear. No bigger than a fingernail, made of tarnished brass, clearly from an old clockwork mechanism. We dismissed it then, catalogued it as unrelated debris, a random fragment, a stray piece of the building's decay. But what if it hadn't been? The architect had been obsessed with time, with the meticulous timing of his crimes, the precise orchestration of fear. He'd left behind cryptic messages about moments, about the ticking of the clock. But he'd never incorporated actual clockwork into his macabre displays. It had always been abstract, symbolic, until that single overlooked gear, and now this. An entire, intricate mechanism, openly declared, meticulously transported. It was too specific, too perfect to be coincidence. The architect in his twisted genius had been a loner, a singular entity, or so I had believed with the arrogant certainty of a younger, less jaded man. What if he hadn't been alone? Someone who had seen that tiny gear, understood its significance, and quietly filed it away. My mind raced, tearing through the dusty archives of my memory, sifting through faces from the architect's case. There had been so many. Peripheral figures, eager young minds drawn to the morbid fascination of the investigation. And then he materialized in my thoughts, sharp and undeniable. The analyst. He had been so young then, fresh out of the academy, assigned to meticulously catalog the architect's art, the meticulously arranged crime scenes, the cryptic messages, every single fragment of evidence. He had a memory like a steel trap, a mind for detail that bordered on obsessive. He had devoured every report, every photograph, every nuance. I remembered the unsettling glint in his eye, a strange, almost reverent fascination with the killer's intellect, a quality I had dismissed as youthful zeal. He would have known about that single gear. He would have understood its significance. He would have seen the patterns I, blinded by my own determination, had overlooked. A perfection of his vision, carried out by someone who felt they understood it better. Someone who felt I had interfered with the original masterpiece. The heists weren't just about money. They were about acquiring specific components. Components for a grander, more intricate mechanism, and his connection to me. My failure had been his opportunity. My downfall his proving ground. He was finishing the architect's work, yes, but he was also settling a score, proving his superior understanding, rubbing my face in my past mistakes. He knew I'd be drawn back in. He wanted me back in. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. It wasn't just a killer I was chasing. It was a shadow from my own past, twisted into something monstrous, something personal. He wasn't just mirroring the architect. He was surpassing him, using my own history, my own disgrace, as a canvas for his twisted masterpiece. The game wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about confronting a ghost I'd inadvertently helped create, a monster I had, in my tunnel vision, allowed to fester in the periphery. The late flight had landed, but the true journey, the real horror, had just begun. I was no longer hunting a phantom. I was being hunted, meticulously drawn into a performance orchestrated by a mind I had once dismissed as merely eager. And I was the star of his macabre show. The fluorescent light, usually harsh, felt softer here, a weary balm against my raw nerves, yet it failed to dissipate the spectral hum of that phrase. Each step on the polished floor was a leaden weight, a testament to the exhaustion that gnawed at my bones, but beneath it, a frantic pulse began to beat. I clutched the worn leather of my bag, its familiar heft the only anchor in a world that felt increasingly untethered. My flight had been delayed, then rerouted, a series of mundane inconveniences that now felt like deliberate snares, each minute a stretched filament in a tightening web. I felt the familiar burn of eyes, not physical gazes, but the phantom weight of the killer's knowing stare. He was everywhere in the hollow spaces between the clatter of luggage and the drone of distant engines. It was the burner phone, a device I rarely activated, buried deep in an inner pocket. Its screen glowed, a harsh rectangle of light in the dimness. A single, untraceable message. My breath hitched. The message was brief, brutal in its simplicity, a string of coordinates followed by 3 words. The coordinates were etched into my memory, a place I had personally chosen, personally secured, a quiet haven I had believed impenetrable. It was the cottage where I had helped the quiet weaver disappear years ago after he had seen too much. He was a delicate soul, a textile artist whose eyes held the secrets of intricate patterns, and briefly, the shadow of a monster. Protecting her had been one of the few fragments of solace I salvaged from the wreckage of the original case. The weaver's knot. It was not just a phrase, it was a ghost. During the original investigation, the killer had left behind a specific, esoteric knot tied from a victim's hair, a detail I had deliberately suppressed from public knowledge. The knot was never mentioned in reports, never leaked to the press. It was my secret. And now it was a message. A tremor ran through my hands, making the phone's metallic casing vibrate against my palm. How could he know? The quiet weaver was a ghost herself, living under a new name in a remote pocket of the countryside, her existence meticulously erased from every official record. I had moved her there myself, ensuring no digital trail, no paper footprint. My own hands had planted the wildflowers in her garden, had painted the window frames. It was my sanctuary, too, a place where a small piece of my fractured conscience could rest. Now that sanctuary was violated. I moved with a sudden, desperate urgency, abandoning the customs line, ignoring the exasperated shout of a uniformed officer. My bag slapped against my hip as I broke into a run, my mind a storm of accusations and frantic calculations. Had I been followed? Was there a leak in the old unit? There was someone still alive from that time, someone I had trusted, now feeding information. Or was it something far more insidious, a testament to the killer's unnerving omnipresence, his ability to see through walls, through time itself? My rental car, a nondescript sedan, was a blur on the highway, the city lights receding into a smeared memory. My past and present were colliding, the echo of ancient screams merging with the hum of the tires. The internal monologue was a barrage of self-recrimination. I had promised her safety. I had sworn it, not just to her but to myself, a silent vow against the chaos I couldn't control. And now the killer had found her. He wasn't just mirroring old crimes. He was taunting me, dismantling my carefully constructed defenses, one painful memory at a time. He knew my weaknesses, knew the tender spots I protected. He was peeling back the layers of my life, exposing the raw, aching core. The gravel road leading to the cottage was rough beneath the tires, the familiar crunch a discordant symphony. Moonlight, thin and spectral, painted the gnarled trees in stark relief. The cottage, nestled in a small clearing, should have been a beacon of gentle light, a warm glow spilling from its windows. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet deafening. My hand went to the small, heavy object in my jacket pocket, a comfortingly solid weight. I moved through the overgrown yard, each step measured, my senses stretched taut. No forced entry, no shattered wood, just an invitation. This wasn't about violence, it was about precision, about psychological warfare. This was a message meticulously crafted solely for me. Inside, the cottage was immaculate, undisturbed. Her vibrant tapestries still hung on the walls, bathed in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. The scent of lavender and old paper clung to the air. Nothing was broken, nothing overturned. It was too clean, too still. The quiet weaver was gone. My gaze swept the room, searching for a sign, a struggle, anything. And then I saw it, resting on the small wooden loom in the corner where he had spent countless hours weaving stories into thread. A single knot. It was tied from a strand of deep crimson yarn, the very color he had favored, a shade as rich as dried blood. The knot itself was an intricate pattern, a specific series of loops and twists, precisely the weaver's knot I remembered from the crime scene photos. It was a detail only the killer and I could possibly know. But it was the small, faded photograph tucked beneath the knot that truly broke through my composure. It was a picture of me, young and earnest from my academy days, clipped from an old newspaper article about a commendation ceremony. My face, full of naive hope, stared up at me from the loom. He knew. He didn't just know about the knot or the weaver. He knew me. He had been watching, waiting, collecting pieces of my life, my triumphs, my failures. This wasn't a new killer mirroring an old one. The stakes weren't just raised, they were bound to my own throat, tightened with a meticulous crimson thread. How could he have known about the photograph? It had been in a box of old mementos, stored in a secure facility that only I had access to. A facility that had been deemed impenetrable. Unless the access wasn't the issue. Unless he had been in my life, closer than I could ever have imagined for a very long time. Every interaction, every fleeting encounter, every face I had met since the original case, suddenly twisted into a potential mask. The realization was a bitter pill, dissolving any remaining certainty I clung to. The coordinates, a stark string of numbers, burned into my vision long after the screen went dark. Not a cold burn, but a furious internal wildfire. That cottage. The quiet haven. The place I had personally chosen, personally secured years ago after the weaver, delicate as her own threads, had seen too much. He had vanished into the quietude I arranged, a ghost in the rural breeze, safe from the world, or so I had believed. Now that sanctuary, my secret, was a target. Not just a target, but a taunt. This wasn't a mimic. The perpetrator wasn't just replaying the old killer's song. They were conducting an entirely new symphony, with me as their reluctant, tormented maestro. My blood indeed had ignited. It was a furnace forging a singular, desperate resolve. I would not be their puppet. I would be the hand that pulled the strings. A trap. They didn't just want to repeat, they wanted to surpass. They wanted to prove smarter, sharper, more utterly devastating. I thought of the patterns, the subtle shifts in their heists, the escalating risks. Each act was a thesis statement, a declaration of evolving mastery. They were learning, adapting, improving. And I, the disgraced detective, the failed guardian, was their unwitting textbook. My failures, my precise vulnerabilities were their lessons. The bait needed to be specific. A piece of the past, seemingly exposed, ripe for their plucking. I remembered a particular ledger, a ledger that documented the hidden transactions of a forgotten syndicate, a ledger that the original killer had sought but never found. I had secured it years ago. After the syndicate's collapse, a loose end I'd tucked away in a forgotten vault, a ghost of a case that still whispered in my sleep. I would leak its location, a false trail leading to a false promise, but the promise of its capture would be too sweet for this new architect of chaos to resist. The location for the confrontation solidified in my mind, a place of transient lives and veiled intentions. Small airport customs, late flight. It was a stage where anonymity was a cloak, where weary travelers blurred into a single, forgettable stream. The perfect place for a ghost to manifest. I knew the rhythms of such places, the drowsy efficiency of the customs officers, the predictable patterns of the final arrivals. It offered corners for observation, exits for escape, and a constant, low hum of human activity to mask the truly important movements. My old contact, a quiet man who moved through the city's underbelly like smoke, owed me a favor. The message would find its way, a delicate, poisoned arrow, straight to my target. The wait was the hardest part. The fluorescent lights hummed with a monotonous drone, casting a sickly yellow glow on the polished floors. My coat was heavy, my gaze fixed on the double doors that led from the customs hall. My breath, a shallow thing, barely disturbed the quiet. I watched the clock on the wall, its hands creeping with agonizing slowness. Each minute was a stretch of taut wire. The first late flight of the night had already disgorged its passengers, a handful of tired faces clutching worn carry-ons. The customs officer, a woman with weary eyes and a practiced smile, processed them with methodical precision. Nothing. No flicker of recognition, no subtle movement that betrayed intent. Was I wrong? Had I misjudged? Perhaps I was merely projecting my own obsession onto a series of unrelated crimes. Perhaps this was just another ghost chase. But then a detail snagged my attention, a loose thread in the carefully woven fabric of my expectations. I had anticipated a direct approach, a snatch-hand grab, mirroring the killer's brazen efficiency. The original killer had been direct, brutal. This one was more nuanced, more manipulative. They didn't just exploit existing chaos. They orchestrated it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This perpetrator wasn't merely mimicking, they were improving. They had studied not just the original killer's successes, but my own investigative failures. They had learned from my predictable responses, my patterns of thought, my reliance on direct confrontation. My trap, designed to lure them into a specific, identifiable action, was itself a predictable move. My stomach clenched. I had designed a snare for a beast, but this was a predator who had already studied the hunter's every move. The ledger, the leak, it wasn't just bait. It was a distraction, a perfectly placed red herring designed to make me focus on the arrival when their true objective might be the departure. Or worse, something entirely unrelated to the immediate vicinity. The second late flight from a less frequented international route was announced. A ripple of movement stirred the few remaining airport staff. The customs officer, the weary woman, excused herself, her shift ending, replaced by a younger, sharper-looking man. A routine change, or was it? The doors hissed open. A small stream of passengers emerged, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. My hand instinctively went to the concealed weight beneath my coat. This was it. The trap was sprung. But I knew with a sickening certainty that I was not the only one holding the strings. The hunter had become the hunted, and the game had just begun. That cottage, the quiet haven, the place I had personally chosen, personally secured years ago after the weaver, delicate as her own threads, had seen something, the missing piece. It wasn't about the cottage itself, not anymore. It was a marker, a twisted signature pointing to the true destination, a final escape route. My breath hitched, a jagged shard in my throat. The small airport customs, late flight. The journey was a blur of asphalt and the grinding gears of my own mind. Each street lamp that streaked past became a fleeting judgment, a reminder of the years I'd spent adrift. The rain began, a thin, persistent drizzle mirroring the ache behind my ribs. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, the worn leather a faint comfort against the tremor that threatened to consume me. This wasn't just about catching a ghost. It was about confronting the reflection in the glass, the man who'd let a monster slip through his fingers once before. The small airport, usually a sleepy outpost, hummed with a muted late-night energy. Fluorescent lights cast a sickly yellow glow on the polished floors. The air tasted of stale coffee and distant jet fuel. Customs. The word itself felt like a cage, a barrier between worlds. I pushed through the automatic doors, the sudden rush of conditioned air raising goosebumps on my arms. And then I saw them. It was the way they held themselves, a subtle arrogance in their posture that tightened the knot in my gut. My world narrowed to this one point, this one person. "Evening," I said, my voice a low rasp that surprised even me. The figure turned, slowly, deliberately. The face was familiar, unsettlingly so, yet completely unexpected. Not the face of a phantom, but of someone real. Someone I had dismissed as inconsequential during the original nightmare. The quiet archivist. The one who had filed the reports, meticulously categorized the evidence, a silent observer in the periphery of my failure. A smile, thin and devoid of warmth, spread across their lips. "Cole, always the bloodhound, aren't you all this time? The heists, the patterns? It was you." "A tribute," the archivist corrected, their voice a soft murmur yet carrying an edge of steel. "An homage to true artistry. The weaver was an amateur, Cole, a clumsy sculptor leaving too many frayed ends. You murdered, you stole, you twisted everything. Oh, but I improved it, refined the technique, removed the sloppy sentimentality, and you, Cole, you were the perfect audience, the disgraced detective haunted by his ghost, so predictable. They gestured vaguely towards the customs queue. I was just about to leave. My work here, you see, is done. Had I been played, all of it a performance for my benefit. The cottage, why send me there? A memento, a reminder of where I lost my way, and a final taunt. I knew I'd understand the coordinates eventually. I always had a knack for seeing patterns, even when I refused to acknowledge their true architect. The archivist's eyes gleamed a predatory glint. I failed to see the beauty in the weaver's work, Cole, but I did. I saw the potential, the raw talent. Wasted by my intervention, I simply picked up where they left off. My fists clenched. I weren't just mimicking, I was part of it. Perhaps a shrug almost imperceptible, or perhaps I merely admired from afar and decided to carry the torch. What does it matter now? The collection is complete, and I, unlike the weaver, am intelligent enough to know when to exit the stage. A customs officer, a burly man with a tired face, glanced our way, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. The archivist's gaze sharpened, their hands subtly moving towards the inner pocket of their coat. This wasn't just talk, this was the precipice. I ran, not going anywhere, I growled, taking a step forward, and I am going to be left with another failure on your conscience. In a blur of motion, they produced a small, silver-plated pistol. It glinted under the harsh airport lights, impossibly small yet deadly. The sudden appearance of the weapon sent a ripple of low murmurs through the few bystanders. The burly customs officer's eyes widened. He reached for his radio. "Don't be a hero, Cole," the archivist hissed, their voice losing its poetic cadence replaced by a raw, desperate edge. "Just let me go." But the word hero ignited something within me, a furious rejection of the label, a primal need to undo the past. I lunged, not for the gun, but for their arm, aiming to disrupt their aim. The archivist, surprisingly agile, sidestepped, bringing the pistol up. A sharp crack echoed through the terminal, followed by the shattering of a glass display case nearby. The archivist didn't hesitate, spinning and pushing through a startled bystander, making for a less crowded hallway leading towards the tarmac. My body screamed in protest, but I pushed harder, the years of self-pity burned away by the raw fury that fueled my pursuit. "Stop!" I yelled, my voice hoarse. They glanced back, a flicker of something that looked like regret or perhaps just annoyance in their eyes before disappearing around the corner. The customs officer was shouting into his radio, security guards already converging, but I couldn't wait. This was my fight, my burden, my chance to finally close the loop. The chase was on, a desperate sprint across the sterile, unforgiving expanse of the small airport, with the ghost of a past failure nipping at my heels. The sharp crack ripped the air, not from the archivist's pistol, but from the crumbling plaster above us, a violent cough from the building's decaying lungs. My lunge had been clumsy, fueled by a surge of desperate anger, not calculated precision. My shoulder slammed into their arm, sending the weapon skyward for a fraction of a second, just enough for the bullet to chew a divot into the ceiling before gravity reclaimed it. The archivist stumbled, a gasp escaping their lips, their eyes wide with a fleeting surprise that quickly hardened into a furious resolve. We were a tangle of limbs, a frantic, desperate ballet on the worn floor. The pistol skittered, a metallic whisper against the concrete, sliding into the gloom. My hands found their wrist, twisting, a primal grip meant to incapacitate. The archivist fought with a strength I hadn't anticipated, a wiry ferocity born of conviction. Their elbow caught my jaw, a blinding flash of pain, and for a moment the world tilted. But the vision of the past, the faces of the lost, burned through the haze. This wasn't just a chase anymore, it was an exorcism. I drove my knee into their side, a guttural grunt escaping them. We crashed against a stack of dusty crates, sending a cascade of forgotten paper and brittle wood showering around us. My fingers closed around their throat, not to choke, but to hold, to pin, to demand answers. Their eyes, once so cool and analytical behind the spectacles now askew, blazed with a manic fire. "Why?" I rasped, my voice raw, tasting of dust and the metallic tang of adrenaline. A derisive laugh rattled in their chest. "To finish it, Cole, to finish what they started, to show the world the artistry you were too blind to see, to prove that some truths demand a grander stage than your flawed justice." My grip tightened. Artistry. You call this bloodshed, this terror artistry? Their gaze surprisingly softened, or perhaps it was just a trick of the dim light, not to be dismissed as a monster. I saw only the chaos, never the pattern. The meticulous planning, the specific targets, the theatrical flourishes, they weren't just mirroring the past, they were perfecting it, elevating it. I reconnected to them, aren't I? I breathed, the words catching in my throat. Not just an admirer, a blood connection. The archivist's silence was its own confession. Their eyes, fixed on mine, held a strange blend of defiance and pride. Some legacies must endure, Cole. Some stories must be told even if the world refuses to listen. A siren wailed in the distance, a rising crescendo that promised intervention. The archivist's eyes darted towards the sound, and for the first time I saw a flicker of defeat. The fight drained from their body, leaving them limp, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Soon the warehouse doors burst open, spilling the harsh glare of flashlights into the gloom. The detective was there, their face grim, followed by a swarm of uniformed officers. My body ached, a symphony of minor pains, but the crushing weight in my chest, the one I'd carried for years, had lightened, if only by a fraction. The past, finally, had a name, a face, and a motive that made a twisted kind of sense. Days later, I found myself in the antiseptic hum of a small airport customs late flight. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and stale coffee, a stark contrast to the dust and decay of the warehouse. I wasn't there to board a plane, nor to greet an arrival. I stood near a tinted window, watching the ground crew preparing a private transport. The detective had called, a terse message about final processing, about ensuring every loose end was tied before the archivist was moved to a more secure, permanent holding. I had felt a strange pull to see it through, to witness the final act of this macabre play. A side door opened, and two uniformed officers emerged, escorting the archivist. They were handcuffed, their movements stiff, constrained. The spectacles were gone, revealing eyes that seemed smaller, less formidable without their intellectual frame. Their clothes, once impeccably neat, were rumpled, stained. They looked diminished, not a mastermind, but a broken vessel for a terrible idea. As they were led towards the waiting vehicle, their gaze swept across the customs hall, a final, defiant search for something. For a moment, their eyes locked with mine through the window. There was no recognition, no challenge, just a vacant, distant stare. I watched as they were carefully placed inside the vehicle, the door closing with a soft thud that resonated with a strange finality. The engines hummed to life, and the vehicle slowly pulled away, disappearing into the pre-dawn gloom. The case was closed, but the quiet resolution did not bring a rush of triumph. Instead, there was a profound weariness, a deep ache that settled into my bones. The ghosts of the past, though identified and apprehended, would always linger. The archivists' twisted logic, their desperate attempt to rewrite a legacy, had exposed the raw wound of my own failure. I stood there for a long time, the fluorescent lights humming above me, the muffled announcements of departing flights a distant lullaby. The world moved on, oblivious to the quiet drama that had just concluded. My reflection in the tinted glass showed a man older than his years, a landscape of lines etched around his eyes.